Thanks for having me. Thank you. Well, I'm really honored, and it's great to be here back on campus in this capacity. Couldn't have done it without Ken Morse, another mentee of his. So I'm here to talk about Dubai. It is true. So here to talk about Dubai, connected things. Dubai is one of the most connected cities in the world. It's the second smart city after Singapore. We will be number one soon, I'm sure. But Dubai's vision to be a smart city is driven by Dubai's vision to be a happy city. And for the government, they are one and the same. So if we want to become the happiest city in the world, one of the ways to which we want to do this is to become one of the smartest cities in the world. But before I start talking about that, some macros. Has anyone here been to Dubai? Can I get a show of hands? Great, fantastic. So we believe that Dubai is the center of the world. A lot of people believe the US is, that's great. We believe Dubai is for these reasons. It's more data. It's the fact that we're sitting in the middle of emerging markets. We're 4 hours flight from 2 billion people, 6 hours from 3 billion. So by the time it takes to get from Boston to San Francisco, we've reached half the world's population from Dubai. It's one of the most connected cities, as most of you know. If you've gone to Dubai, you probably flew Emirates, great airline connecting us to everyone. What's interesting about these 3 billion people that we are so near to is that about half of them are under 25 years old. So you're talking about the youngest population in the world. I can slice and dice this. We're now playing with the numbers. This applies to MENA, which is Middle East, North Africa. This applies to Africa. This applies to Pakistan. It applies to large chunks of developing Asia. So you have half of your population under age 25. And in Dubai, we sit in the middle of it, which goes to show why we have one of the most connected regions globally. So we're also taking a look at the highest social media penetration. The highest YouTube viewage per capita in the world is in Saudi Arabia. That's nice on a per capita basis, but if you take a look at an absolute basis, YouTube's second largest market globally after the US is actually the Middle East, North Africa. And then it comes Asia, and then comes Africa. So when we're taking a look at where we're sitting in the middle of emerging markets with one of the youngest population, one of the most digitally native populations because they're the youngest. And so we want to be a smart city. So Smart Dubai was an initiative to capitalize on that. What Dubai provides to these 3 billion people within a 6-hour flight is first world infrastructure in the middle of emerging market or third world demographics. And what that means is in Dubai, your electricity doesn't cut, which it does in most places from Kenya to Jordan to Saudi to India. You have some form of power rationing. Or even as in San Francisco earlier this week, we had power cuts at the hotel. It reminded me of being a child in Syria many, many years ago. So Dubai offers first world infrastructure. Your electricity, your internet is better than most of Europe and the developed parts of Europe. And your physical road moving around infrastructure is so good that what's happened is it has become home and global headquarters for most international corporations outside the US. So if I talk about Google, Amazon, Facebook, I could keep going, Twitter, Snapchat, on the new economy side. You have Oracle, SAP, all managing their headquarters for emerging markets up to Singapore out of Dubai. So in the beginning, they come in and they manage Middle East, North Africa. Then they say, you know what, let's just manage Middle East, Africa. Then they say, let's just manage Middle East, Africa, South Asia. They call it MIASA. Then they add Europe to that mix because of tax. So you end up managing IMIASA, which you could go all these acronyms. You have MENA, MIA. But effectively, Dubai has become global headquarters. Honeywell's regional headquarters. You could go to Lockheed Martin. So all these companies increasingly manage larger chunks of the world, catering to these 3 billion people who are mainly digital natives out of Dubai. So Dubai saw this opportunity as government, and you alluded to this, Mark. I spent the last year and a half in government. Dubai saw this opportunity of, we have this amazing infrastructure. We are so well connected. We're in the middle of it all, right? And we're tax-free. We want to become the happiest city. How do we do that? We become the smartest city because that's what people demand of us. That is what the youth demands. That is what our geography demands. Everyone is so connected. The government owns the telcos. We know what everyone's doing. We have all this information. So if we want to be the happiest city in the world, we need to be the smartest city in the world. And that's where this initiative came from. So part of it revolves around data. Dubai offers open data. A large part of it then was emulated by the regional governments. So Dubai is a trendsetter. So you end up with Vision 2021, Vision 2030, Oman Vision. So these vary from Saudi, where you had the recent leadership doing a tour in the US, all the way to Kuwait. So the whole region suddenly woke up and said, well, if Dubai is going to be the smartest, happiest city in the world, we want to do that too, right? And they did that before with real estate and with other things, and they've tried. And it does set the bar really high so that other people can be inspired and lead change. So what that means, regulation, first and foremost. The government said that we are going to be pre-regulatory. So what does that mean? That means that we want to work with innovators, with companies that don't have a regulatory sphere yet because they are so ahead of what they're doing, whether it's blockchain, et cetera, that we are going to work with them to set entrepreneur and innovation-friendly regulation. We're going to be the most regulatory-friendly place in the world for innovation. Taxation, it's a tax-free environment. Free zones, you can own your company wholly. And then funding, there's all these initiatives to support entrepreneurs coming from outside into the region to grow. Specifically, the government in the last 2 years has said 25% of all buildings in Dubai need to be 3D printed by 2030. Now, I will not ask for a show of hands on who thinks that might be true, but the way that they've approached this is they've said that whether or not we achieve this, and this has been true over the last 24 months, what this has done is create an industry. You have all additive manufacturing plants setting up in the UAE and Dubai. You have experts in the industry coming in for consulting, bringing in people, setting up companies. So you suddenly have a massive effort and demand. And the way they're going about this is actually very clever. They've said that from the municipality perspective, we will not approve the building of any new building in 2018 unless 2% of it is 3D printed. Could be the door handles. They actually don't care. Show me how 2% of that is going to be 3D printed. And next year it'll be 4%, and so on and so forth, that by 2030, any new building will be 25% 3D printed. So they're not saying that 25% of buildings, as in this one and that one, but rather 25% of what's inside your building. And because it's a top-down leadership, they can do that. So now every building has to show how 2% will be 3D printed. And then you can play with, is it 2% of your construction budget? Is it 2% of the volume? Is it, right? But at least it gets people thinking in the right way, and it gets plants being set up and drives innovation within that specific industry. 100% of all government transactions are on the blockchain by 2020. That's in 2 years. That's a big ask. They set up the Global Blockchain Council, got experts from around the world, and said, the government's going to lead the way in this, and this is our goal. Again, may or may not happen, makes for great PR. Dubai is known for its PR. But what it has done is that every blockchain-related company in the world now has a presence in Dubai. The first part of that is to say in real estate. So when you transfer properties, why is that not on the blockchain? Let's get it on the blockchain. So the government said, all right, within our 12 different government departments, which ones are the low-hanging fruits? Which ones have other governments done and that we can do within 6 months to a year and emulate immediately? And where are the brains behind that? And let's set up that industry. If government's a client, then people will come here and set up because we're going to pay them. And then the private sector can piggyback off that. And then 25% of public transportation is autonomous by 2030. I probably think this is the most realistic one of the three, but that's a goal that they're driving towards. They've had every single VTOL in there to also take a look at vertical transportation landing, vertical takeoff and landing, and take a look at how is this possible. And because, again, it's a regulatory framework that's very top-down driven, this is actually very possible. So certain roads will be the first ones to be purely autonomous, and so on and so forth. And there's a lot less regulatory hindrance in our part of the world. So the combination of these has really positioned Dubai then also a highly attractive generator of future investment opportunities. So when you think about one of the biggest hindrances to innovators, it is regulation. If you say government's behind you, government's supporting you, you're in the middle of a very quickly growing and demanding population and market, and you're sitting in great infrastructure, and yet there isn't enough capital and funding in the ecosystem, it becomes an interesting investment proposition. So the Dubai Future Foundation, which is where I was recently serving as a CIO, works with different initiatives in different parts of the ecosystem. And three of the things that they have are, first and foremost, the Dubai Future Accelerator, which is a government accelerator, which is always a bad idea. Except in this case, where we've literally had the Singaporeans who we always strive to emulate, come in and say, how did you do this? How can we build it? And how can we emulate it? So when the Singaporeans tell us, how can we copy you? We're like, yes, we're finally on something new. But the way that they did it was different. They got 12 government departments, again, very top-down leadership, or semi-government. So it includes Emirates, which isn't government, all the way through your electricity and water authority, all the way through your transportation authority, your healthcare authority. So the 12 key government entities or government-related entities in Dubai. And each of them came in and took a space, a physical real estate space, within the DFA, the Dubai Future Accelerator. And the thinking is that then the DFA team, which was part of the foundation, would then go out and work with these 12 different government departments and say, what are your biggest challenges? And what goals could you set for the world? So for the Electricity and Water Authority, it could be we want to become 20% more water efficient in the next 3 years. Roads and transportation would come in and say we want 30% less congestion in the next 5 years. So very smart goals. And then we would go out to the world and say, can we please find entrepreneurs that can meet these goals or help us meet these goals? And we would get applications from around the world for these 12 different government entities challenges. In the last cohort, we got 3,500 applications across from transportation to water to health, right? And for each of these government departments, we then select 3. So out of 3,500, you end up with 36. And they come in to Dubai, all expenses paid, for 9 weeks, and work within the accelerator space with that government department to overcome their challenges, to really think about how can we change the world. And so when you're working with government and you're working with the top leadership in government here, there is no regulatory framework. It's what regulatory framework would enable innovation the most. How do we structure our regulation in this way and therefore become your client? Out of the 9 weeks, 85 to 90%, depending on the cohort, leave with government contracts. They set up in Dubai. They bring talent to Dubai. Dubai gets to innovate, become a smarter city. This is how the blockchain movement happened. This is how we're working that by 2020, when we have the World Expo, which is a big deal for Dubai, but no one else in the world seems to know what it is. It's a world exposition where all the countries participate. We will have VTOLs working as taxis to take people to and from Dubai airport to the expo site, which is in the middle of the desert. And that can only happen because the government has said, that's going to happen. Road and Transportation Authority, meet the accelerator. Accelerator, go find the companies that can do this and work together. So that is one of the things that a lot of innovators do come in, sometimes with just an idea, and say, we have an idea, we have the technology, but we don't have revenues yet. And sometimes it's Uber working on VTOL, who will not be the ones doing this. But we work across the board to say, what is your innovation? How can we use it as government? How do we help you set up here? The Dubai Future Accelerator is the, I guess, Emirati, so the UAE national initiative to educate people about the future of work, which is massive. So if you're going to talk about the future of work, you need to be talking in a part of the world where half your population is under 25. You can't be talking about it in an aging demographic. So the future of work, what does work look like in the future? What do we expect from people? And then the Museum of the Future. And to give you some high-level numbers, MENA, so just the Middle East and North Africa, the Arab part of the world, graduates 115,000 engineers every year. And yet you have 40% youth unemployment. So enabling them in this manner is massive. So this is the Dubai Future Accelerator. How many participating entities? The first cohort, second cohort. Now we're doing cohort 4. So we have cohort 3 numbers. And so this is kind of then where these people graduate, go to, and don't find capital. So as we graduate these people, they have companies. They look to grow. More often than not, there's a little bit of venture funding in the region. The ecosystem is growing, but there isn't enough venture funding, which is why I ultimately spun out of government and said, let's just fix that part of the ecosystem. So I started a venture firm. And as we see more and more companies reach the inflection stage, had one big exit, one big funding round last year. So Amazon bought our largest e-commerce play, which is Amazon's first acquisition geographically, not technically speaking. And that was Souk.com. But again, if you think about the demographics in the region, how digitally engaged everyone is and how young everyone is, you know that e-commerce is about to explode. And then we had our version of Uber called Careem, which was funded by Didi, the Chinese. So we see a lot of Chinese people coming to the region and trying to say, okay, well, valuations are very low. There's a lot of innovation. How do we capture that? So when we saw last year 8,200 business plans at the MIT Enterprise Forum. So I sit on the board of the MIT Enterprise Forum in the region. And we've been running the business plan competition now for 11 years. So last year we had 8,200 business plans. 1,400 companies were looking for funding. The others were starting up. But this is really massive. This numbers on the year before were about 3,000. So you're seeing a massive upsurge in the number of people starting companies and the amount of innovation coming out of the region. So in summary, and then I'll open up to questions. The percentage of the GDP invested in venture capital, this is how we see it. And I focus on this at the end because I think that capital is the crucial part of the ecosystem. So you can have everything, but if you don't have capital, it's really hard to get your companies off their ground, as a lot of you have seen. So percentage GDP in the US, it's somewhere near 0.3. In the UAE, it's much, much lower. So we have lots of money in the region. Everyone knows about our very famous sovereign wealth funds. Their mandate is to invest outside the region. And so when it happens to the region is that a lot of the money gets thrown outside, and then the world doesn't really look at the markets over there as innovative, with the exception potentially of Dubai. So this is what we're looking at. So you have 50% of your population is under 25. You have the highest mobile internet and digital media penetration, and the highest youth unemployment in the world. And MENA is easily extended to Africa and other parts, and you'll find the same statistics. And yet in the US, where you have venture capital, you actually have venture-backed revenues, 21% of your GDP, and so on. So for us, what number makes that up is minimal. It's 1.2 billion in the UAE. It's about 2.2 billion in Saudi would make up that difference to get you to a similar percentage, which is where I find it very unfortunate that this hasn't happened. But I also think it's a massive opportunity for people who are ready to do it. So we're now at an inflection point. The government agenda is first and foremost the whole smart city drive, both for Dubai and for the region. The sector is undercapitalized. We have very attractive valuations. We have cost-efficient entrepreneurs. Because there's no capital from the get-go, they're very cost-efficient. We're not as fortunate as potentially Boston or even the West Coast, where people can just rely on their next fundraise. From the get-go, they have to think about their P&L and their cash flows. And then we have recently large raises led by global companies. So the most recent anecdote I was saying yesterday is a company called Fetcher. I don't know if any of you have heard of this company. It's backed by NEA, based in Dubai, 2 Dubai-based founders. And it came across what I call the quintessential Dubai entrepreneur problem. You are sitting in the middle of an emerging market, and you're going to solve emerging market problems. And you're fortunate enough to have the Dubai infrastructure to do it. So the problem they were solving is the following. Last mile return and logistics is about 20% in emerging markets. So DHL, FedEx, all these guys waver between 18 and 21%. And so what's the reason for that? Well, the reason is that most emerging markets, from Africa to China and most of Asia, have no addresses or street names. And to the extent that they do, nobody uses them. It's always the second right after the McDonald's is how you guide someone to your home. So they said, OK, all these markets don't have this physical infrastructure, but everyone in these markets has a cell phone. So why are we thinking about this in a backwards way, where we're still delivering to physical addresses? We should be delivering to the person. We need to deliver to the cell phone. So they went out and they set up a company called Fetcher, and they became the last mile arm of some of the large global logistics companies. And ultimately, they started expanding into Africa. So you have Kenya, Nigeria, and their last raise was done by NEA. And so that was another regional success story. But no one's going to be sitting in Boston or Silicon Valley thinking, how do I solve last mile logistics in emerging markets where there's a 20% return? Those aren't going to be solved in emerging markets. And if we think about the future and growth, most of it's going to come from emerging markets, where the population is young, where economies are still growing, where mobile and digital penetration is very high. But again, emerging market problems are going to be solved in emerging markets because people address them on an every single day level. And the recent noise and the exits that have happened in the region have also drawn a lot of attention. So all these things together are the reason that I accepted Mark's invitation to speak here when I was in government, but recently left because I thought this was an amazing opportunity to actually fund this ecosystem and grow with these companies and create more jobs and success stories. So thank you. Questions?
Thank you, Noor. That was actually what attracted me about having you come and chat, just the notion of what you're doing, the notion of what you did in government, creating smart cities out of the middle of the desert, how that all worked. So I thank you again for a great talk. We're going to do Q&A, and then immediately following Q&A, we'll have a little networking session, and then our next panel will begin at noon. And I'm just going to assume that Ken's got a question since he's been in region and he's both of our mentor. So I'll put you on the spot. Do you have any questions?
Okay.
Ken?
So one of the things that you
Did he do that like when you were in school, that he just kind of...
Of course, that's Ken.
Thank you for the old call, Noor. One of the things that you have done beautifully with the MIT Enterprise Forum of the Pan-Arab region is you have engaged successful entrepreneurs who have done it before, people like Fadi Gandour and others. What role are they playing, and did they encourage you to take the leap and get back into the private sector? And by the way, welcome back.
Thank you. So what encouraged me to take the leap and get back to the private sector was I think the lack of the speed at which the government operates. So Dubai has a lot of vision, and they will put their money behind what their agenda is. And the agenda is a smart city, so let's do that. On the venture capital side, that's nice to have. I used to be a venture capitalist before I went into government, and what drove me to VC actually is more experience of my life story. So when I went back to Dubai in 2005 after graduating from Sloan, I took a short detour in my career from consulting and joined our family business. Our family business was an interior contracting company. It was $60 million in revenue, 1,000 people in 6 markets in the Gulf. And over the next 3 years, I scaled that to $600 million in revenue, so 10x, 9,500 people in 22 countries. We became the largest in the world in our industry. I did the IPO in April 2008. The number that sticks out at me from all those numbers the most is the number of jobs we created. So from 1,000 to 9,500. So we created 8,500 jobs in 3 years. We grew tenfold, and we built the #1 company around the world from Dubai. And so if you go to Singapore, our work includes the Marina Bay Sands and Mandarin Oriental. If you go to Angola, if you go to Azerbaijan. So literally from Germany. So we literally became the gold standard for interior contracting. The ability to do that, and at the same time, I had my own company. So when I went back, I saw a market need. There was no yoga studios. I opened one. It was a personal desire. And that became the largest wellness chain in the region, sold that to a private equity firm. But what was really hard for me to understand was why it was so much harder to run a chain of yoga studios. There were 5 of them. We had 6,000 students a month with 72 teachers, than a $1 billion market cap company. And so I inadvertently became a mentor, an advisor, and an angel investor to so many people in the region that when I had exited both, I looked back and found a portfolio and ended up managing that portfolio, which grew into a venture capital firm, which I was happily running until I got a call from His Highness. At which point I said, okay, call to duty. Let's figure out how we help Dubai become the smartest city in the world, how you open up a venture arm, how you build an accelerator, how do you do all these things to enable growth. 2 years later, a lot of the mentors in the region, some of the other VC firms, a lot of the entrepreneurs would kept knocking on my door, and I had my hands tied behind my back because you can't invest personally if you're working in government. I think the knocks just became louder and louder. And so a few months ago, I decided that I needed to go back to the private sector, continue investing. And if you can scale an interior contracting company from Dubai to become the biggest in the world, you can definitely do it for a tech company, or 2, or 3, or 10. And that's my belief. Thank you.
So you had the smart city question before. You want to ask it again?
Sandra Bear with Civic Smartscapes again. Loved your presentation. I've been to Dubai many times, and I'm always telling the United States cities that they should emulate what Dubai is doing. I mean, we don't have an emir here. We have a democracy, so it makes it a bit more difficult. But my question for you is that we need an emir here. My question for you is, you know, what is it that the U.S. could successfully steal from Dubai, to take from Dubai, learn from Dubai, that would help our cities be much more innovative? And you know, this blockchain decision, the happiness minister, I mean, these are things every city should do. So how are you seeing that? I mean, I don't think Dubai competes with the United States. They don't need to. But we should learn from them. And how do you see that playing out? How could that work? Thank you.
I think it's an age-old question of change and legacy systems. So one of my favorite things to say is, you know, in Boston, and I lived here, we moved here almost exactly 20 years ago, you used to have to put quarters to pay for parking. right? And you still put quarters to pay for parking. I think now maybe you can use your credit card. In Dubai, you SMS. You park your car, you type in your license plate into your text, you type in the code and the number of hours you want to stay there. And you text. And then when it's 10 minutes from expiration, they text you back saying, do you want to extend? And you reply with a Y or an N, right? So, but that was a decision. That's a decision. Forget legacy systems, invest in this, and everyone gets on board, right? So no one's at stake for investing in the legacy systems. No one has to go lobby for the new funding. So I think that as long as people don't want change because of legacy systems or because there's a cost to pay, it's hard to implement change. For us, we used to pay using quarters or dirhams in our case, right? But then the decision came that this is archaic, change it. And it was changed. So I think that it just takes a strong leader and a strong character to be able to cut their losses and move forward.
We have a question in the back.
So I'm Michael Davies from MIT, and actually working a lot in KSA at the moment. Having spent a bunch of time in the region, I think you're enormously fortunate in Dubai because you have the government support. What I'm seeing in the rest of the region is what I would characterize as more than anything else, sort of a schizophrenia. There's a group of the population who are trying to make this happen. I see it in KSA in particular. And then there's the whole variety of the rest of the stuff where, and I'll just to give one example for one digital event we were organizing, we couldn't get 3 critical foreign women into the country because of the issue with chaperones. So there's this sort of like, yes, we want to change, but there's this huge schizophrenic legacy about preserving cultural values and the rest throughout the region. I'd be really interested in your take on this because I think Dubai is anomalous in a very good way, and your thoughts on the rest of the region.
Sure. So when I was 11, I moved from London to Saudi Arabia. And so as a little girl in London, I was in private girls' school, and it was gloomy every day and raining and cold, not as cold as this. And had a winter uniform and a summer uniform, and would go to school and it's dark and come home and it's dark. And hardly ever got to play outside on the weekends because it was cold and raining and wet. And when I was 11, we got up and for family reasons moved to Saudi. And I went to an American school, which was co-ed, and which had no uniform, and where school was from 8 till 1. And the sun always shined, and there was a pool in my backyard, and all my friends played outside all the time. And so when I say that, people say, oh, it must have been such a culture shock going from London to Saudi, in the sense that you've gone from this European open mindset to this very closed Saudi Arab mindset. And for me, it was the opposite, right? And I think that Saudi is exactly that. It's microcosms. So you go to some places, it's actually more liberal than the US. And you're nodding, right? And you go to other places, it's very conservative. And the challenge the leadership currently has in Saudi is that the way it has been done for so long is not accepted by 50% of your population who's under 25. And that's kind of a line in the sand that they've drawn. And even if 80% of them don't accept the way that it was and 20% do, that's still too many on a grand scale. And so the change that is happening is not optional. It is driven by the demographics, right? And it might take some time for the older generation, the 50-year-olds pluses who still want to chaperone with every woman, to get their heads around it. But the leadership has seen that it's not optional. And the responses on social media, so as nice as Dubai is, Dubai's social media is censored. I can't write anything against the leadership, right? Whereas Saudi Arabia is open, back to the microcosm. So you can criticize the leadership as much as you want in Saudi and not get in trouble, as long as you do it with some sort of respect. So this is kind of the Saudi thing. It's in between, which is why the opportunity is now. You have so many companies that are kind of at 10, 15, 20 mil rev that have never raised money, that are innovative, they are engineers, they're ready to go and conquer the world, but there's always 1 or 2 stumbling blocks in their way because they're in the midst of this change. 5 years from now, this will all be over, and the speed at which MBS is moving is incredible. He's not waiting for anybody. The changes he's done in 1 year, nobody could have fathomed doing in 10 years. And what he's going to do over the next 2 years will continue to be more of the same. So in 5 years, you won't recognize it. Again, when we moved to Saudi, I didn't have to wear abayas, and neither did my mother. So in the 90s, women didn't wear abayas and cover their hair in Jeddah. That was a 2000 till maybe 2016, 17 thing. So it's phases. But yeah, it's not done yet. We're still in the process of doing, and Dubai is leading the way.
I was kind of curious of the Museum of the Future. Is that a physical place?
Yes, that's a physical place. Us Arabs, we love real estate. And we're happy to invest as much money as you'd like us to in real estate, and which is why investing in venture and companies is very difficult, because you can't see it, feel it, and touch it. And so one of the ways to enable not just the regional population, but the broader regional population, the 3 billion people that are literally 6 hours flight away, to see the future is for them to actually see the future. So to walk into 2030, to walk into 2040, to do time capsules from the future rather than from the past, to be able to experience that in order to be able to imagine it and then create it. In the absence of great public school systems and great universities, that is the way that you can inspire people. And Dubai obviously being the home for these great talents to move to.
Cool, I know we can get, I see this question, I know Michelle flagged me, there's one in the back.
Does it work?
Yes.
You mentioned a few times that the government makes the decisions. 2 years, blockchain, so on and so forth. It sounds like they're making the right decisions. What are the checks and balances to make sure those decisions are sound? Because there could be risks, even from a blockchain point of view. If you're all on blockchain, the rest of the world is not in 2 years. So there's issues with that. How are you guys, what are the checks and balances on the government side?
So there are some, and my biggest frustration with the Dubai government is the same as my biggest frustration with MIT, and that it's very decentralized. It's one decision maker at the end of the day, but everyone runs their own little microcosm, right? And so when they say we're going to be 100% blockchain by 2020, there's about 7, 8, or 9 different organizations that get sprung up that are all working towards the same goal. And if one fails, one will succeed, and they're always challenging each other. And that's the checks and balances, is that if all 4, 7, whatever of them come back and say this is a bad idea, then the leadership has that from 4, 5, 6, 7 independent sources with different sets of data based on different experiences, and they do listen. But if 2 are saying it's a bad idea and 7 are saying it's a good idea, then they'll hire a consultant, probably McKinsey, to tell them why there's this misinformation. But if all are saying this is a good idea and they're running towards it, then they know that they're onto something. And so the number of things that actually are initiated and get funded is, I would say, 10 to 20% of the different initiatives that get put to them. And it's based on this feedback. It is very much, it's top down. But what surprised me and what they're very proud of is that it's a very consensus-driven leadership. So it's top down after consensus has been built. And people are open to sharing their views and to disagreeing. And the decision won't be made without almost consensus amongst all the top ministers and leaders. We have a minister of artificial intelligence now. That's the new thing.
Ziad first, because he's all the way in the back. And then we'll do Bill.
Hi, great presentation, thank you. I'm a big fan of Dubai. I've been going to Dubai for 20 years as a tourist observer. It's been, the first time I went, I thought, oof, this is great. No traffic, no taxes, everything is easy, great food, it's sunshine. 20 years later, I went, there was traffic. I heard that taxes are starting on the, whatever it's called, VAT, and then now soon, income tax. There was traffic. So those are the problems of any city, any country that's developing and has reached a critical mass. What do you think is going to happen?
More traffic, more taxes, I'm not sure. I think that Dubai is becoming a center, as they, I think, once hoped it would. The population, so we first moved there 23 years ago. And back to, there was no traffic. There were no highways, right? Except the one going to Abu Dhabi. I think it will become increasingly a hub thanks to Trump. So lots of people who might, think that, the US or Europe, but mainly the US, have found Dubai as home. I have a close friend who's very active in the venture ecosystem worldwide, and He now tells the anecdote that he used to go to Africa and people would say, how do I get to the valley? And now he goes to Africa and people say, how do I get to Dubai? And so it's closer to home. It's an open culture. Everyone is accepted if they are there to bring value. Taxes or VAT, I don't know about income tax. I have my own thoughts on that. Then again, you have, as I said, Singapore that implemented very low levels of some of these taxes and managed to maintain. So that's kind of on the broad picture. On back to the demographics, what doesn't get shown in these slides, and there's no data or stats around it, is the number of people in the broader circle that have no economy at home. And I say that very broadly, but if I think from Syria, where now there's a war, but even before, to Lebanon and Jordan, to Iraq, to large parts of South Asia, the economies are very weak and the opportunities are very slim and there's no employment. Right? And that's a very broad statement, but it reflects a large part of reality in a lot of these economies. And so when these people, specifically this youth, want to create something in their lives, whether it's a job, whether it's a company, whether it's simply to rent an apartment and get married, a lot of them are unable to do it on their home turf. And the immigration then becomes, where do I move to? Where can I move to? As long as the US has shut its borders, and Europe has largely shut its borders as well to a lot of the expats from these countries, you end up with Dubai being a pulling force for all these people who want economic opportunity to create something of themselves. So that's what's not seen, in the sense that 50% is under 25, fantastic. What does that mean? That means that most of these people, their dream in life is to get to Dubai. And I don't say that because I live there. I say that because I've traveled and I've talked to them, and for them that is the end goal. It's no longer New York or London, thanks to the politics.
So Bill, you'll be the final question, then we'll go to break and go from there.
People have changed the way they talk about peak oil. It used to be when you'll run out of oil. Now it's peak demand. And there's, I think, a pretty strong consensus, not on the date necessarily, but at some point demand is going to start to go down as electrification and transportation and so forth. That's going to impact, obviously, UAE and Saudi Arabia are heavily dependent on petroleum for their economy. Do you think those countries will be able to make that transition? How much pain will there be? And sure. I guess we can talk about that.
There's a lot of pain. The last 3 years, people have started feeling it, both on the amount that they can spend, on the GDP per capita, on the excess income. I think people started feeling it a lot more in London and the south of France in the summers than we did in the region. So you have a lot less holidaying happening around the world, where you used to see a lot of the Gulf going. To the benefit, and I say this, and then this isn't the answer, but I say this as a Dubaian, to the benefit or detriment of Dubai, because back to traffic. So before, if you came to Dubai in July or August, it was ghost town. Literally, there was no one there. It's too hot. It's about 120, 130 degrees with 80% humidity. Now you go there and you have half the Gulf there because they can no longer afford to holiday in other places, and Dubai offers great rates on hotels, and there's lots for the kids to do, from the Legoland to the Motion Gate to the biggest mall in the world, to indoor ski resorts, right? So you have everything, and so it's become a holidaymaker's place for the Gulf during summer. But in the long term, I think the line that everyone talks about is kind of data is the new oil, right? Not sure how much I believe that, but that's something that I hear at least once a day in the region. And I think it's come from the recognition that if you have the youngest population in the world and the highest number of mobile users on a percentage basis, and I don't know how you slice it or dice it, you actually have, and what we actually have now, is an incredible amount of data. Right? Everyone's online. No one cares if the big organizations know what they're doing, when they're doing it, who they're doing it with. Everyone is fully digitally engaged. I mean, you can blame that on the fact that they're young and therefore they don't realize that there are repercussions later in life. Dubai has said we have an open data platform. So the countries have all agreed that we need to harness the data. This it provides an opportunity, and if you harness the data, what do you do with it? Right? That's where AI, ML, all that comes in. I think Amazon bought Souk not for e-commerce, but rather for data. Souk has more data on the Arab world than any other company. Kareem, which is now funded by Didi, regions. Uber also has a lot more data, and they're in Africa, right? So I think that in the new world, in the new economy, if oil's dead and we're all feeling that a little bit in different ways, what is the new economy? The new economy is driven by the new population. The new population is about data and tech, which is why the governments are doing it. They're not doing this because they think it's fun. They're doing this because if they don't do it, there is no other path, right? There's no other future. So they're feeling it. They're trying. I mean, yesterday we had one of the Abu Dhabi groups buy 500 startups, which, you can feel however you want about that, but it shows like instead of putting their money in more real estate, they're actually putting their money now trying to own VC firms and understand the ecosystem. A lot of it is knowledge transfer. It won't be an easy journey for them. It'll be a mindset shift. But there's massive recognition around that, which is the first step. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor.